Running alongside the rise of monasteries is the all-important influence of the Church of Rome. During the Middle Ages, you do not have different sects or branches of Christianity. You have only the Church of Rome and the churches in communion with Rome. Hence the word Catholic, which just means universal. This is all the churches in existence in Western Europe, and a fairly regimented hierarchical structure with the Bishop of Rome, affectionately known as the Pope from the Italian word for father, at the top of the ecclesiastical pyramid. The Church of Rome held this vaunted position in Western Europe for several practical reasons. One, the Church of Rome is largely the only institution that survived the collapse of the Roman Empire, and thus the Church provided a point of continuity with the old Roman world, a world that was fast slipping away. Then, on top of that, the Church served as a gateway to the classical past. By converting to Catholic Christianity, the new barbarian warlords running the former provinces of the Roman Empire could gain access to books in Latin. The success of the Franks in Gaul is as much owed to the conversion of the Merovingian King Clovis, who ruled from 466 to 511, to Catholic Christianity as it was to the military prowess and the ruthlessness of Clovis himself. This is all the more ironic since Roman emperors persecuted Roman Christians from time to time, but the Germanic barbarians taking over what were once provinces of the Roman Empire saw that the Roman Church was now a means by which these kings could tap into the literary wealth that the Romans had built up. Third, the Church of Rome could provide these Germanic kingdoms with administrative and bureaucratic support. Converting to Catholic Christianity gave new barbarian kingdoms, such as in Frankish Gaul or Visigothic Spain, access to the steady supply of administrators already serving the Roman Church. Consider the famous story of Pope Leo I meeting with Attila the Hun, the infamous scourge of God and king of the Huns, a barbarian tribe from the steppes of Central Asia, threatening to destroy Rome in the mid-5th century. You would think that the emperor, or at the very least a consul, would go out and try to negotiate with Attila. But instead, it is an official from the church, the Bishop of Rome, with no weapons at all, walking into Attila's tent and convincing him to spare the city of Rome. Or take St. Gregory of Tours. Born into an aristocratic family in what was once Roman Gaul, Gregory entered the clergy, since there was no Roman state to serve anymore. He became a bishop, which is a leader of a group of churches in a large city. He became a bishop for the city of Tours, an advisor to Merovingian kings like Childebert I, and a noted scholar whose history of the Franks provides a valuable resource to anyone studying the early Middle Ages. In short, the Pope, his bishops, and other members of the clergy took on duties that the Roman emperors and the Roman bureaucracy used to do. And the reality that the Pope, the bishops, and the clergy could wield this authority well enough occurs for a number of reasons as well. It's one thing for those Germanic barbarians to look to you for support. It's another thing to wield that power and influence effectively, so effectively that the Church of Rome becomes the dominant institution in Europe for 1,000 years. The city of Rome had always been the biggest and most important city in the Roman Empire, and the Church of Rome carried with it some of this importance once Roman emperors, following Constantine, converted to and promoted Christianity. So the Roman Church possessed more resources and had more money than other churches in the Roman Empire, just by nature of the city it was located in. Other churches of comparable wealth and influence were located in the east, in cities like Alexandria in Egypt and Antioch in Syria, but these will be conquered by Muslim armies in the 7th and 8th century. Once these churches disappear, Rome's standing amongst the Christian churches that survive increases too. Rome was made up of wealthy citizens, and if these citizens became Christians, so the Church of Rome was made up of fairly wealthy, well-educated Christians who could serve as effective administrators, bureaucrats, or power brokers in medieval Europe. The most significant reason, though, the one that really mattered to Christians in Western Europe, concerned the relationship of the Church of Rome to the Apostle Peter. Peter was originally a fisherman until he was called out by Jesus to be one of Jesus' 12 disciples. Peter enters the gospel story as an uncouth and uneducated day laborer, but after Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension into heaven, Peter becomes a talented public speaker and a leading figure in the early Christian church. Peter would end his life preaching in Rome, perhaps serving as a bishop in the Roman church, and he would eventually be martyred in Rome during the persecutions of the Emperor Nero. Peter would in fact be crucified upside down because he could not bear to be crucified in the same manner his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ was crucified. Now, in Matthew 16, in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus seems to give Peter a unique authority over the other apostles, giving him, as it were, the keys to the kingdom. And views of what is called apostolic succession dictate that the authority of the apostles is passed down through the office of the bishop and leaders of churches in cities in the ancient Mediterranean world. If Peter enjoyed unique authority over other apostles, and Peter was martyred in the city of Rome, then it follows that preceding Roman bishops would enjoy a similar authority over other churches. This view, called the Patrine doctrine, is contested during the Protestant Reformation, but the important thing here is that people in the Middle Ages believed that the Pope's relationship to Peter was the basis of the Pope's authority, an authority so great it was above kings. Kings in Anglo-Saxon England, for instance, aligned themselves with Roman church practices because the Roman church was founded by Peter. Popes could crown kings like Charlemagne as emperor of the Romans, and popes could subsequently bring holy Roman emperors literally to their knees, barefoot and in the snow, by excommunicating them from the church. Popes wielded immense spiritual influence and authority in the Middle Ages, and they were also the feudal lords of immense tracts of land in central Italy called the Papal States. Still, you could say that the Pope had only as much authority as individuals in the Middle Ages were willing to give him. So why was it the case that these barbarians would be willing to give the Pope and his bishops any legitimacy at all? The reason being, the medieval world was so brutish and short that the message of the Christian faith was made that much more valuable to the peoples of Western Europe. The tenets of Christianity, of a loving God and a merciful Savior who took on all the misery and sin of the world on himself in order to free humanity from such misery, not only gave the peoples of Western Europe a message that gave meaning to their suffering, since our suffering cannot in fact be random, since the world is ruled by a loving and benevolent God, but also gave them a way of escape out of that suffering in terms of a better world to come. No matter how bleak the world may seem, it was still controlled by a loving and merciful God who promised to free those who trust in God from that misery. And this gave the peoples of the Middle Ages, from the peasants to the monks to the leaders of war bands, the strength to persevere through even the darkest of times. Take this selection from the Venerable Bede, an Anglo-Saxon historian whose ecclesiastical history of the English people offered this account of the conversion of the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. The bleakness of life is illuminated by the new religion of Christianity that had come to the shores of England. So a king asked his advisors if he should convert to this new faith, and his advisors respond to him, "The present life of man, O king, seems to me, in comparison of that time which is unknown to us, like to the swift flight of a sparrow through the room wherein you sit at supper in winter, with your commanders and ministers, and a good fire in the midst, while the storms of rain and snow prevail abroad. The sparrow, I say, flying at one door, and immediately out another, whilst he is within, he is safe from the wintry storm. But after a short space of fair weather, he immediately vanishes out of your sight and into the dark winter from which he had emerged. So this life of man appears for so short a space, but out of what went before, or what is to follow, we are utterly ignorant. If therefore this new doctrine contains something more certain, it seems justly to deserve to be followed." and the other elders and king's counselors by divine inspiration spoke to the same effect.